Hey folks, welcome to Snowpal's Polyglot Software Development Podcast. Our guest today is Chris Williams. Chris is a CMO at Arima Data, a startup focused on synthetic data marketing mix modeling on a self-directed platform. Chris has been in digital media for about 30 years and is a former president of IAB Canada and other associations. Chris, thanks for taking the time to chat. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks a lot, Krish. It's really a pleasure to be here today.
If you could I know I gave a brief introduction, but if you could sort of introduce yourself to our audience before we get started with the topic, Chris, that would be great.
Yeah, for sure. So as you said, like I've been in digital for 30 years. I mean, it started at the very beginning of the internet when commercialization of the internet was a thing and people were asking, from a marketing perspective, what can I do with the internet, on the internet? Should I build a website? Should I build, what should I do with these things? So we were involved in that at the very beginning. And that's been sort of a recurring theme throughout my career is developing new things and getting marketers to use more and more technology as times have gone by. So ad servers and MarTech platforms and all sorts of things.
Perfect. I'm going to do a quick screen share. So hopefully I picked up. This is the company, right?
Yeah, that's it. And so, I mean, as you can see here, one of the core products that we're offering is a marketing mix model. And marketing mix models have been around a long time, since about 1949 was the first marketing mix model. So they predated cloud computing and code and no code implementations. But what's changed, of course, is what used to cost hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars and used to take months and months is now being completed, in 15 minutes, an hour, and is all being done in the cloud and dramatically less price. And so, of course, that changes things. It really accelerates what marketers can do with a market mix model. Now, some people don't even understand what a market mix model is, and
No, I was just gonna. It's that some people would be me as well. So if you could just explain at the highest level, what is a marketing mix model?
Yeah, for sure. So imagine you're Nike or your BMW or you're selling shampoo. You're out there spending a lot of money, millions and millions of dollars on all different types of media. Could be TV, could be print, could be paid search ads, and you're trying to figure out what works in driving sales. So the approach a market mix model does is it uses correlation and a lot of math to look at when did you spend that money and then when did the sales happen. So it's a time-based correlation. Marketers would call it a probabilistic approach because it's not set between that specific person saw the ad and that specific person bought the product. But it is extremely powerful in that it covers all types of media, whether it's digital or analog, and comes together with all of the advertisers' sales. And so I think it's about 60% of advertisers are using market mix models of some kind in understanding, where their dollars are being spent and how to optimize them.
Makes sense. So we can take an example for us to understand this better. Our audience is predominantly technical, so but this is an item that will be very relevant to business owners and entrepreneurs because I've had a conversation with a lot of the startup founders in the recent past, and there's something new you learn every single time. So here our focus is going to be on marketing a startup. So in this example here, Chris, to assume one, you would the marketing that we're talking about here, is it marketing B2B products? Would that be a good example? B2B products?
Yeah, marketing mix model tends to be used with B2C products. That's
Okay.
really where sort of we have mass audiences. There are other techniques that you can look at for B2B audiences, which for a marketing of as my role is to market our startup. So it's obviously a B2B approach. Would we use a market mix model for our own purposes? Probably not at the very beginning. We just don't have enough data points. For us, every new customer, you get a handful of customers. Each one has a value to it. We're looking at lifetime value of each customer. We're also trying to track, the source of each of those customers. So our product doesn't actually address with how we measure our own marketing.
Okay, so which means can we take before the call I quickly shared some of the things we do. One of the things we do as a company is build APIs and publish it for other businesses to consume and integrate. would that be a reasonable example for us to take and understand what that, how marketing and, everything that we want to learn about marketing from you during the next 45 minutes to an hour, how that would be applicable to sort of selling APIs? Would that be a decent example?
Well, for your particular business, you probably wouldn't use an MMM. You would use something more closer to how we are marketing our own startup, which is to get out there and sort of do things like podcasting, to also to sponsoring events, meeting with prospective clients, doing demos, getting free trials in people's hands. I'm sure that's all the sort of things that you've been doing, for a long time. And of course, paid search, search engine optimization. These are really core things for B2B marketers.
Okay, so I mean, what we plan, we are talking generically about marketing, right? Are we? I'm presuming we are not necessarily going to focus on marketing mix modeling unless you want to. That's fine with me. Or should we talk about marketing in general? Like take this example and dig deeper into how, because the audience is founders and engineers who are building products and solutions, sometimes B2C and sometimes B2B, and everyone wants to, they have a fair understanding of how to build that software, but not
Yep.
so much what to do after that or during the process of building it, to socializing, marketing, and networking. So anything that you could share that helps both B2B and B2C, Chris, would be super awesome.
Sure. I mean, one of the first questions you have, when you're coming to market with a piece of technology, is it, the question is it a B2C or is it a B2B? And of course, that's going to drive how you sort of go to that market. Like, who are you appealing to, and what avenues are you going to choose to get to people who are actually going to pay for your product? And a huge portion of that is literally sort of knowing, what market am I in, B2B or B2C? And then it starts with what is the benefit for that market. So if it's a B2B, a client, you have to really think about who are the people, who are the prospects who are going to be signing up. You want to really focus in on a small number of potential clients that you can get the product in their hands. Maybe it's a minimum viable product, get them to use it, get some feedback. How much would they pay for it? Those are very initial things, and often that is, uh, coming from relationships. So what we would call is an RQL, a relationship qualified lead, and then you're out there talking to those people and seeing if you can actually sell them the product. And often it's people that you know very well. From there, you're starting to build up a little bit more of a repertoire, a little bit more of a profile in the industry. Then you're starting to get into things like SEO, right? You need to generate content that explains what your technology product is, what are the benefits, who's it for. Uh, Also, you as a founder, what's your vision? Where are you going to take this thing? How much does it
Mm.
cost? Is it a high end or a low end product? A lot of communication has to happen for people to read on their own and understand what your product is and how it fits into their life. Now, if you're on the other side, on the B2C side, it's considerably
Hey,
different.
hey, Chris, sorry to interrupt you there. Before we go
Yeah,
to B2C, I want to dig a little bit deeper into
yeah, yeah.
everything that
Sure,
you've
let's do
you've
that.
mentioned here, right?
Yeah,
So one of the first things you said was, and I'm going to take our example just to not have to be creative or imaginative, just a real life example, right? So one of our products is the B2B product that I showed you. I'll do a quick screen share so folks who are watching also get a bit of context. So we own a few different products. One of it is a suite of APIs that we publish on AWS Marketplace and other API hubs. So businesses can either purchase, go through the SaaS-based licensing model, get the API key, and use their consolidated AWS account to literally start coding to the backend dependencies within the 5 minutes of when they actually go through these clicks. That's
yep,
one way of doing it. Or they could purchase a commercial license and then they can start integrating, right? The idea is your developers, UI and web developers, they, web and mobile app developers, and even server side developers cannot have dependencies. They don't have to stand up a backend team, socialize this, and they can literally start coding to solving their core business problems. So they can go to market sooner. So that's the gist of what we are doing. One of the things that we do, and we have the list of APIs and thousands of endpoints to satisfy those cases, right? That's a very real life example. So I'm going to pause there. And I'm going to go with some of the things that you mentioned. You said you have to start with a small group of potential customers, right? Before we get to that point, I want to ask. So I want to say stakeholders, and correct me where my language is incorrect. There are, be selling it to a company that needs to start using this, building software off of our APIs. Now there are multiple roles there, as I can imagine. Chris might be the decision maker, but Chris may not actually be the consumer, meaning you're not starting to write code or build your platform or the app leveraging these APIs. So I want to start with the stakeholders. Things I can think of are Chris being a developer or an architect leveraging this, making a decision whether or not this is going to help you and the team. But Chris may not be the decision maker in terms of the pricing and whether this is something you need to buy or whatever that means. Those are the two stakeholders I can think of. I know that's restrictive. So if you could just speak to who they are, how we reach out to them, and things of that nature, that would be one of the first questions I actually have.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the person who's going to be the actual user is your champion. They're the one who looks at the sort of the technology, whatever it is, and says, this is helping me in my job. It's making my job faster, easier. I can produce more. Whatever the benefit is, they're the person who really is fighting for, I want this tool and I want to continue using it. And I also want to see it continue to improve, with your dev team. So that's your champion. They're going to be the person who's also talking to the sort of the purse holder who handles a budget and says, okay, well, here's the price. I really want this. Can it fit within the budget? That stakeholder, of course, doesn't want to spend money, and that's just their job. They want to manage the budget. They don't want to be outlaying as too much, and yet they also look at it and say, can I get this business to work better, faster, and grow? And they understand that they do have to invest some money into the situation. So between those two stakeholders, there is a dynamic. One wants it, the other one doesn't want to pay for it. And so that's where you get into sort of freemium models, where you get a chance to look at the tool, you get to try it out. Maybe it's a period of time, maybe it's a limited scope of the set, but it allows your champion to get it in the door and start using it, and then be able to convince that other person that it's worth upgrading for the actual price that you're positioning it for. There might be other people on the team. There might be multiple influencers who are all looking at the tool. Maybe they're all a bunch of coders or programmers, and they all agree that this is the right tool. And they're going to the one person who's the budget holder. So there's that potential dynamic that's going on. So it's important that these kind of influencers that are, whether they're inside the company or whether they're outside the company, that they exist and that they're fed, that they can get a chance to try the thing out, that they can write reviews, or they can send that word of mouth email that says, hey, you should check this thing out. And that's really what you're looking for, is at the core. If you don't have that influencer, you're dead in the water at the beginning.
Yeah, that's a great point that you mentioned there, right? So how do you go find these influencers? And this is some of the practical problems that we also have as a company, as a startup that's building this. We know, from a product market fit, right? Just to say that for a second, we built our web app, and to quickly, even show that for a second that I showed you earlier, we built our web app and then our mobile apps quickly following that. This was our first product that we launched. It took us, as a group of engineers, Chris, it took us a little bit longer to build this than, we built it in very quick time, given the breadth of features it actually does have, even if I'm saying so myself. We've heard that from other people who've given us feedback, but it took us longer than it probably should have, because we didn't have the backend system. We had to build these APIs. They were private APIs to begin with, right? So anything that we had to do here, let's say we have a Kanban view, rather than focus on this view and the user interface and user experience, we also had to add support on the backend to persist this data, to implement caching, to make things quicker, and the whole gamut of whatever is needed to make this functional. The same thing for mobile. We also expose most of this functionality on a mobile app, and we didn't have the APIs available to us at the time, so it took us longer. So we then realized that other founders were running into the same sort of issues, so it actually would benefit them to having these APIs. So it's not a manufactured problem. It's a problem that we ran into, and it's a problem we talked to other people that they're running into. So we re-provisioned our APIs, made them public so other people can consume and start building software.
Mhm.
Now, that said, we need to start socializing this, right? So this product is the most recent one in our suite, but as we start socializing this to the community, there's a number of things that we need to do. One of the, I know the first things, one of the things we need to do is start prospecting to find people that might be a good fit, right? So would prospects be part of those list of influencers, or are they mutually exclusive from influencers, as you mentioned influencers earlier?
No, I see them as the same. Your prospect is you want to talk to them about the product, but you also want to get them to a place where they understand what it is and they understand the benefit and they're willing to be the influencer more on the inside, right? Influencing the corporation or the stakeholder that actually controls the budget. That's the first level of influence, to say, listen, we want this product and we want it brought in into the company so that it makes my life easier. Then you can start thinking about sort of broader other types of influencers that are out there that are just, they're doing product reviews, or they're, offering some sort of general guidance out there to the community. um, and those communities exist either online or offline, obviously. But the online ones are very efficient in the sense that they're global. You can find your niche where those people who have the problem that you just described, they're all discussing that, and you can bring them something that says, "Hey, have you tried this out?" But don't discount the offline communities. People get together, for all sorts of conferences and events, and if you can get into that community as well, there's a level of credibility that comes, especially if you're up on stage. You can't discount that. So you get into places where there's sponsorship opportunities, and you have to have money, obviously, to participate in those things. But the combination of the two can really accelerate your business.
Makes sense, right? And I had some questions about the aspect of prospecting, but I don't know if that comes under the realm of a CMO. Is that relevant to a conversation like how you prospect?
That's a good question, because people do separate like sales from marketing, and some have, they focus the sales team very much on developing, the identifying the prospect, or doing a lot of cold calling, and trying to book that first meeting. And at the same time, marketing is, a little bit separate, is out there trying to communicate at a very broad level as to what this thing is and who's it's for. Really, the two have to work together, because it's not just one or the other. You need both. You need both marketing and sales to work, and they have to be saying the same thing. They have to be talking about the same benefits. They have to be taking people through the same process and showing them what it is. It's just that they happen a lot differently. One is more like a cold call sales call, and the other one is more like a trying to build up some type of inbound marketing. That is the people out there that are searching, for the solution that you have.
And so when we talk prospecting for a second, because that's not just for us, but even other developers who've started companies, those are things that may not necessarily come naturally to you if your background is a developer, you know how to build software, but not so much what it means. So we've been learning that since we've launched the B2B product, very early stages. Yet we want to believe we know a bit more than we did like about many months ago. So prospecting, we use LinkedIn, say Sales Navigator, as one of the
Sure.
tools. We try to use a different tool, which was like mass email. These sales tools that we subscribed to it. We paid a fair bit of money, and then we warmed up our reputation of our domains, and we did everything that we had to do.
Sure.
Doesn't matter. It's still 90% of the emails ended up in spam, and they were junk, so it was just not useful. So we sort of paused that, and we switched to using LinkedIn, spending a fair bit of time figuring out, does Chris Williams, is that the right prospect? Is that an ideal prospect? And then we should reach out to Chris. That's kind of how we have been sort of doing it, but it's been very challenging. So Chris, what are some good ways like, in other words, we have this API, we have this product, we have a B2B offering. How do
Sure.
you figure out who we, in our minds, we know a developer, a senior developer, an architect, or a director of engineering, or a senior manager? These are all stakeholders and potential decision makers, but these titles are pretty loose, and everybody uses a
Yeah,
varied set of titles depending on which part of the country you are, or even different depending on which part of the world you're located in. So, what are some good ways and what are some not so good ways in trying to narrow down your prospects? So you're actually trying to reach out to the right people and not wasting time reaching out to people who you probably shouldn't be reaching out to.
for sure. LinkedIn is actually an amazing tool. It depends on how you use it, of course. Sales Navigator is great for identifying companies and people that are potentially the kind of people that you think that should be using the product. But again, you're guessing, right? Like you're making educated guesses that you can create a mass list of people that you're going to go after. But at the end of the day, you don't know until they actually start responding and sort of saying, "Yeah, that is the product," or "Sorry, that is the problem I'm experiencing," and I see what your solution looks like. Very challenging to do. Takes a lot of time and sometimes can take a lot of money. The other way is sort of what we would call a sort of like a lighthouse approach, which is where you talk about the problem and you talk about your solution, and you are posting a lot on LinkedIn, and you're actually just trying to get the message out there in a very clear, consistent, and explanatory way of what the problem is and what the solution is. So you've brought something to the market that it has to be a solution to a problem. You can't bring to market anything that is just what they would call a solution looking for a problem, because then you're just going to spin your wheels. You're never going to find the audience that you're after because nobody's experiencing the problem. So if you can define the problem, then you can start talking about it in this lighthouse kind of approach where you're spreading that information out to go, these are the kinds of things that uh, programmers are experiencing. This is what the challenge looks like. And then people should see that and go, oh, yeah, that's me. I have that problem. And I'm trying to figure out how I would solve that. And then you come in with, well, this is what we've got. And so you start to build up followers on LinkedIn. You can start to see, what are the kinds of people that comment on your again, you're blogging a lot about sort of what your problem solution approach is, and then develop that list of followers on LinkedIn at a personal level. Especially if you're the founder or one of the senior level people at the company, people are should be interested in your opinion about what the market's problems are and what you're doing about them.
Great points, right? So I'm going to do another screen share to take a very specific example. One of the things you mentioned two things. I'll come to the first thing later in a second after ask about the second. So you talked about creating material, right? Documentation, blogging, creating content. So here is just an example. Hopefully it's a related, reasonably relevant example. One of our APIs is called a building blocks API. And this particular article and this video is us talking about what problem it's solving, why you would probably want to use it, and how you could potentially go about using it. And this is like a 20-minute video that shows you, maybe it has some sample code, yada yada yada, and then it goes through this, right? So if this is a fair, reasonable example of that, the second aspect of what we're talking about, we create this, right? And then we publish this on LinkedIn, right? So the content creation, the blogging part about the product itself. Uh, and we post it on our network. We are a small team of people, so we post it on our pages. We have a company page and the feed, but we are limited to the network that we let's say we have a number of connections and those people see it, but it's the same people who are seeing it. Even if they're engaging with some of this content, it's the same people. It's not people outside our network, which again, I think at the last I checked was like 4 million people in the US. That's a very conservative number in the business of software development, right? Seems like a pretty small number, but it's still a pretty big number, because if we're trying to reach people. Let's say I'm going to come to the prospecting part in a second, so maybe I'm jumping the gun here. But what I'm trying to say is the problem here is there's some value in posting it back to your network repeatedly, but that's still, it's like you're talking to your own family or your group of friends repeatedly. It's only so good. How do you go outside that network so other people, the rest of the world out there, is able to see this content and engage with this content?
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. So events and associations. There's got to be an association out there that's for software developers where people are getting together and just, they're members of that association, and they have a bunch of online resources. You want to connect with that association and find out. You want to be part of that community, and that just involves, sometimes it's speaking at events, sponsoring events. So you want to find out when their events are. You want to find out what the sponsorship terms are, because if they all have that problem, they want to hear from somebody who's got a solution. So don't discount, having to spend a significant amount of money to get out and in front of a lot of people in one shot, and that can expand your LinkedIn community dramatically and quickly. But the point is, you have to have something to talk about. You have to have something that's really, like that's something that people want. And if you have that, then you're good to go. Like you can participate in the association or that event, and then you start looking at how many different events, where they are. You're going to end up having to maybe fly around a bit, but it is going to cost. It does take an investment in money to do that.
Right, great points there. How do we get started? I mean, where do you look? I mean, is there a platform? Like, where do you look for these events? Like, what are relevant events, and how do you look? Like, for instance, there are conferences that happen in the DC Metro that we show up at, for instance, right? And there was like a startup week recently, but those we stumbled into. But otherwise, what is a very formalized, scalable methodology to actually find events and find events that are related to the problems that you're trying to solve? And then
Yep.
we'll come to budget in a second.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of got to get into your prospect's head and sort of see, potentially like where are they, like physically, or what cities are they in? Are there any, and are there any associations? So you have to find those keyword phrases of like, what is this association organized around? Is it around, somewhere around software developers? Is it a specific language of software? What is it that sort of that you can actually search and find that event in that community to join? It sometimes you already know it. In some cases, it could be from a previous job that you've had that a big corporation was a member of an association, and you can continue that on. Other times, it could be even a small club. It doesn't take that many. Like you only need a handful of clients to really get going, and then you can start to scale up. And I always just think of it as like Steve Jobs and Wozniak. Where did they start? It was the Homebrew Computing Club. It was a bunch of, it was not a lot of people that got Apple going at the very beginning. Uh, but you have to find that community.
Interesting. And then by community, is it tech events is probably one of it, but I'm presuming it's more than that, right? So what would be like if I said tech events is a type of community, what other like even look for those communities? And it's a very genuine question. What are we searching for on like Google, for instance?
It all depends on like very specific things that are part of your product. It's about the language of the product and that particular problem that it solves. So you really have to. That's where you have to sit down and write up. You know, I always think of writing and blogging as helping develop your strategy about what the product is and what it's not. You have to be succinct. So writing is critical to understanding what you're bringing to the market. What problem am I solving, and why does the market care, or why should the market care? Why should anyone pay for this thing, whatever it is? If you can answer that in your blog, then you're well on your way.
Right. So let's say, okay, so somebody finds these events and what I know this is it depends on the type of problem again, but just to ballpark, let's say most startups are either solopreneurs or two people founders, right? A
Yep.
technical founder and then a non-technical founder. And let's say a lot of the startups, at least the people we've been talking to, is like five people, maybe three, maybe 10, somewhere around their early stage startups. What is the kind of budget that they should potentially look to allocate for doing something like this?
Well, it depends on the cost of the product, right? If you're a developer and you're even with a team of 3 to 5 people, if you're selling enterprise software at $1 million a pop, getting one client is going to be a big deal. So you better think of your investment very, very carefully. But it's going to be a big number to start off with. You have to be in the right place to sell $1 million worth of software. On the other hand, if it's much smaller, you can be much more careful and move it along and do some more testing with smaller amounts of money. And
Hmm.
and even paid search, like paid search it starts off small. It's not a lot of money. It gets you going, but it can become a significant portion of your budget.
So what does paid search mean when you say paid search?
I'm talking about keywords in Google.
Okay. Keywords. So essentially leveraging Google Ads, is that what you're talking about there, Chris?
Well, not just Google Ads, right? Like advertising as a sort of like a banner out there is, you're trying to give a short message, almost like a out of home board. That's different from paid search. Paid search is somebody has a problem that they're trying to solve, and they're looking for something very specific. So let's say you've made software that is almost like a recipe management kind of thing. you know, the more niche it gets, the more specific the language is around what people are looking for. And so they might be looking up, recipes. They might be looking up other sort of cooking related material. And your ad can be very uh, reflective of what they're looking for. So, maybe recipes wasn't the best example, but it's they're going to put into Google a very specific phrase, and if you can answer that phrase with your product, then you're in a place where every single person who is using that phrase is a prospect to you. And that phrase is worth a lot of money. So, like that you start bidding on it, $1 cost per click or whatever it is. If they can click on that ad, they go, that's what I'm looking for. And off you go.
Right. In other words, somebody's going to Google to search, they enter a bunch of words, and then the sponsored ads that show up should be yours, for instance. That's
Yeah, for
that's
sure.
kind
I
of what.
mean, your ad might be 1,000 APIs for developers, something like that. And somebody's, in their mind, they're sitting there going, I'm looking for APIs for developers. I'm looking, so that's what they put into Google. You want to be there, right? So that is really ground zero for you.
Couple of things there, right? One is those do get expensive for early stage startups, right? That's one thing. But two is, even if you're willing to spend that money there, given where technology is at today, right? Given say Chat GPT, and given that Google actually now has Gemini, and you actually see a lot of the answers, so people are not even going to those partner sites. And are those still effective, or is it becoming lesser and lesser effective?
Well, that is a big question for marketers: is what is the effect of AI in the future, and sort of like near future and long term future, because the platforms are sort of trying to hold on to the traffic as opposed to referring it to the next place. And so they want to answer that question within their own platform. So that's not great for the companies that are trying to promote themselves. But there's still a huge volume of paid search availability on things. Now, we don't really know where AI is going to land us, as whether it's B2C or B2B. There's a lot of thoughts about you know how the interaction between consumers and AI is going to work, especially in the search area, right? You think about the millions and billions of dollars that are spent on things like planning vacations. And if AI can plan your vacation better than you can, why would you plan your own vacation? So you go into an AI chat GPT kind of sort of thing and say, look, I'm looking for a beach vacation on these dates. I mean, it can come back with a full itinerary, and you just pay the fee and off you go, potentially. And so that really does change the nature of paid search for marketing in a B to C area. On the B2B side, though, I still think that, there's, I don't know, it's, but we'll see how that rolls out, right?
No, I
We'll
think
see.
that's a fair thing. That's a fair thing to say, with especially with Perplexity and other companies that are coming up in the space. Things constantly change. Now, again, as startup founders, now, some of us are business people who start a company, and others are engineers. Like in our case, we were engineers who started the company, right? So we just started writing code. So you appreciate the skills that you do have, and you also appreciate the skills that you don't have, that you wish you had, but you can't have all the skills, not everybody, at least, unless you're Musk or somebody. But how do you how do early stage startups find someone like you, like Chris, right? So do we work with like fractional CMOs? I'm seeing the term fractional a lot these days. If you can't hire somebody full time, whatever we've spoken so far in the last 25, 30 minutes, right, Chris? Is this something a CMO is responsible for? If you have to assign a role to a lot of the tasks that we talked about so far, is that role a role of a CMO?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think the role of a CMO within a startup at the very beginning is you have a lot of different hats you have to wear. Like you, one minute you're writing copy, you're also running Google ads, you're also creating images. You're going very very broad, or you have a lot of favors that you can call in from people, to get that kind of stuff done. If you're successful, then you get to start to organize yourself a lot better and specialize and say, okay, well, these people over here are going to do this, and those people over there are going to, delegate certain tasks to. I think that what you would consider a usual CMO's job, from a sort of like a traditional type of brand or a traditional CMO, is quite different than the CMO for a startup. And so the pace, the scope, the amount of budget that you have, and the sort of entrepreneurial side has to really be there for the startup. You don't have a lot of money. You don't have a lot of time. Things are very nebulous. You're trying to at least land just a few clients to get some cash in the door so that you can then carry on to the next level. Whereas a more traditional CMO, they're in organizations that are a lot more mature. You know, they have ongoing budgets. They know what their budgets are going to be, and there's some variation. They also have teams that they can delegate to. And so trying to get like a traditional CMO to operate in a startup, some can do it, but it's a big switch in gears.
Okay, so what would be the ideal role for startups, right? Again, when I say startups, you can imagine around a team of 10 people-ish, give or take, right? Uh, because we, as for us, we don't have a specific person who specializes in something like that, right? So we have an architect or a developer or a product manager who's wearing this other hat and doing some of these things that we've talked about. Sure, we can salvage, but everybody sometimes, not all the time, people are really good at what they do and not so good at things that they're, it's just not their cup of tea. So
Sure.
what would be the role that one should look for as a startup to fill a number of things that we talked about here?
Yeah, no, that's a good one, because sometimes the best CMO is actually the founder, and it can start there. Whereas the founder has a very clear perspective of the problem that they wanted to solve, and they're very clear about what they built, and the features of how they built that and why they built those specific features into the tools, right? Because they're the person who, if they really have a good grasp of the problem, they have a lot of elegance that they can code into the solution. They understand what it's like to be a user and what the pain points of the user are. And if they eliminate those kinds of things and communicate about that, then they're actually operating like the CMO. They can talk about, this is your pain, and I've solved it for you. And so having that founder at the very beginning who understands the problem solution, but also has a network of people that probably also have that problem as well, is a very good starting point. Now, the CMO, if they hire a CMO in addition to themselves, they should also be looking for a person, and especially all the senior staff that are coming into the startup. They should all have a really good Rolodex of networking opportunities to go out and show and explain what this new thing is that's been developed. And they have to be ready to explain it in a way, because often it's a minimum viable product. Things are missing. Sometimes it doesn't work quite as well as it should. Right from, there's pieces missing, and that's coming next month and stuff like that. So people have to have a pretty high level of technical skill to get through the demos and explain. This is the core of the product. This is why you really want it.
Okay. And in terms of coming to budget, budget is limited, right? In a startup, typically either
Always.
you're right,
Yeah.
and even in large organizations, it's like saying, I know years ago someone told me, if everybody had all the money, all the time, and all the time, almost everyone can solve those problems, right? It's what makes it more challenging is you have limited time, you have limited amount of money, and then you have to solve the problem. At least you need skills and other things, but just at the highest level. So what is for a startup that cannot spend money flying to, say, LA or San Francisco or New York and stay 2 nights at the hotel and then go socialize and network and go attend these events and conferences? what are some optimal ways that don't cost a lot of money, but you can still achieve, sort of the 80/20 rule where you can solve most of the problems that you actually have to be solving? What would you recommend that startups that don't have a specific budget allocated for something like this, how should they go about solving this problem?
Well, yeah, you're not going to have an annual budget, but you can have like a monthly budget to sort of say, okay, we're not going to plan too far in advance, but we can at least invest over shorter periods of time with smaller amounts. And if we can see some level of traction, we know we're on the right path. Again, it depends on the value of the product, because let's say, for instance, you are able to land one client in that first month. That might be, $100,000 sort of project. But what can also kill you is that, sure, they've signed on day one. It doesn't mean they pay you on day one, right? So you have there might be 30, 60, 90 days before you actually get cash in the door on that very first client. So again, keeping track of like, okay, so it took me a month, 2 months, whatever to close. There's going to be another, number of months before we actually and they might even be billed quarterly, right? So you're not going to get a big lump of money at the very, very get go. So again, keeping track of your cash, absolutely critical, and sort of payment terms, things like that.
And earlier you mentioned about being able to explain the problem clearly and sort of speaking to the solution and why a product, why this would make someone's life better, why they should use it, and why they should actually spend money and pay for it. Now let's talk about that for a little bit. Sometimes if you're appeasing hunger or satiating hunger, then it's the problem. I mean, is simple enough, at least simpler. Like, hey, you know what? If you're hungry, you need food to eat. You're thirsty, you need something to drink. Here's what I'm selling to quench that thirst or to satiate that hunger. But software is not necessarily that obvious and conspicuous, even for people who've been in the business of doing that for a while. And here's what I mean by that.
Mm-hmm.
There is a quote that is misattributed to Henry Ford, I think, on the internet, but I don't know who actually said this, but regardless, it's a good quote, which is, if somebody, I think it goes like, if I ask customers what they wanted, they would have said fast horses and not cars. I'm paraphrasing the quote. I'm sure you've heard of that one, Chris. So the consumer is not always necessarily aware of the problem. Sometimes you have to explain the problem and the solution, right? It's easy enough. It's many bounds easier if people understood the problem, because all that you have to do is explain your solution and tell them why that is the best fit for the problem. But a lot of times the problem is not even clear because people don't even necessarily recognize that there is a problem. And
For
here's
sure.
what I mean, very specific to our product, the
Yeah.
API. If 5 years ago when we launched our first app, I've done this for for many years. So I try not to reinvent the wheel, and I always look to see what we can reuse or buy or lease or whatever, and only build the pieces that we need to build that's truly unique. So we've looked out for this, and we didn't find any pre-existing APIs or components or solutions, so we ended up building ours. But I do know a lot of people that who actually don't even look for that. They're like, hey, if someone throws a problem at them, it's like, if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Even managed services providers or professional services or consulting companies that end up building from scratch every single time for many reasons. One, maybe because they can probably charge the client a lot more than they could otherwise charge, or other times they think that is the only way to solving the problem. So now part of our challenge here, Chris, is trying to tell somebody saying, you know what, you can solve this problem, but you don't have to do all of this. You
Sure.
only have to do some of this. The rest of it is kind of already done. And then they're like, okay, how is that done? Your API says building blogs, but I'm building something for the travel industry. It doesn't have the word travel in it. And now we're trying to explain, hey, you know what? It doesn't have to say travel. You can use these APIs and endpoints to solve travel problems or pharmaceutical problems or some other problems. So the gist of what I'm trying to say here is educating the user about a problem that they do have, but they do not recognize that as a problem. In the context of marketing and our conversation, how can a company or a startup, whether it's a founder or a CMO or whoever that is, it's doing that job, how do they go about addressing this?
Yeah, no, that's a good one because our challenge is we've developed a number of different products. One of which is the marketing mix model, as we talked about. Um, The other sort of products are synthetic data. And when we talk about synthetic data, it's a place where the customer is often, I don't understand what you're talking about. And so they don't even, as you say, they don't know what the problem is. They don't even know what the solution looks like. And so what we have to do is we have to meet the customer where they're at. And so this is uh, think of it as almost like a beginning product or an entry level product that says, this is something that you can understand right now. So, as I said, MMM has been around since 1949. Marketers need MMM. Many of them are already using it. However, what we do is we have a almost like a graduation process. As like once you've started building MMM within your own sort of realm, then we can look at what else can we do with this data, and we can sort of see what the next graduated step is and say, okay, well, we have this other thing that actually makes the MMM even more powerful. We can bring in some of those other tools and some of those other data and introduce it as it's a like an upselling or a scope expansion strategy. So you already have a relationship with somebody, they're already paying you to do something. There's a high level of trust there. You're delivering something valuable to them. But what you're showing them is that let's talk about the education process, about what the founder's vision of what can be done in the grand scheme of things. And so that's where that overall vision from the founder becomes really important, because they're like, sure, it's like, you go to the convenience store to buy milk, and next thing you know, you come home with 5 or 6 other things that you didn't know that you needed, right? That is 100% the strategy that retailers use, is get you in the door with some kind of loss leader or some kind of entry level product, and then you're going to develop the relationship from there. I mean, as an example, Harley Davidson motorcycles, most of the money they make is not actually from motorcycles at all. It's from jackets, it's from keychains, it's from flashlights, it's from all sorts of things that people can start their relationship with the brand. And then eventually it expands out to, buying the $30,000 motorcycle eventually at some point in time.
It's an amazing point. So I have a couple of questions there. So you're saying the first sale that you make is may not actually be the real sale that you're intending to make, right? You're trying to sell something, but you sort of get a foot in the door, right? You get a foot in the door. You're like,
It has
let
to be relevant though. It's not like it's a just something that's sort of off to the side. It has to be relevant. It has to be part of the brand. It has to have that graduated approach. In that they've come in the door with something that's important to them, but it's also important to you, and you migrate up from there. And you see this in luxury brands as well. Like many of the sort of very high end, like Louis Vuitton and all of that stuff, they have low level sort of products that people can participate in the brand, but it's still a luxury brand, a luxury product that they're buying, even if it's a lower price.
Okay. And then to go back to one of the things you said earlier, if you have to just give a high level breakdown of the types of things that come under sales, even sales and marketing, right, Chris? So say there is a startup and the founders are there, they built a solution, and then now they're like, you know what, I need to deal with sales and marketing. Two questions is, does that happen on day one? Like, do you start worrying about sales and marketing before you have something that's functional? Or do you first worry about building whatever it is that you're building before dealing with sales and marketing? That's the first part of the question. The second part of the question is, once they do decide on sales and marketing, whenever that comes into play, what are some of the line items? I know you mentioned events and conferences and things of that nature, but if you could just say it one more time, under sales, what are some of these high level line items, so people are watching this and listening to it can dig deeper into those categories? And similarly, under marketing, what would be those items? So two questions, which is, when do you get started with sales? When do you get started with marketing? Before, after, or during when you're building the product? And then how do you break the line items in each of those categories?
Yeah, I mean, marketing begins the moment you start being an entrepreneur and say, okay, listen, I'm going to develop a product. And you go, well, if there's again, it goes back to the problem solution. You're building something for somebody. The question is, who is that person? What do they look like? What is all that? That's a marketing function. You're thinking about who that person is, where do they live, what that problem is, how much money do they have, to actually pay you to solve that problem. If they don't have money, then there's no market to be had. Like, you can bring a solution to out to the world, and people look at it and that's great. I'm not paying for it. And then you go, okay, well, I guess there's a mismatch. You're never going to build a business that way. So the marketing function begins very, very early. Then sales comes in. I think some people would say, oh, you want to have sales first because you want to actually start making the cash register ring. I think actually it starts a little bit later. Is once you get to a place where you're beyond the founders, initial contacts, then you're starting to get into we need to hire somebody whose function is to get out there and meet with people and start selling. Now,
Okay.
again, at that point in time, I don't think marketing and sales are that, you're probably finding them within the same person, but over time, depending on how successful you are and the size of the business, eventually you will have to hire a salesperson whose full-time job it is to run around and talk about your product.
Okay, that makes sense. And the second part of the question was, just the line item. So under sales, I can think of prospecting as one item, uh, ads as another one, for instance. What would be some of these other items that come under sales?
Well, ads I wouldn't put under sales. I put it under marketing. Like, let's
Okay.
assume that you've got to a place where marketing and sales are a little bit separate. Sales is going to be about prospecting. It's going to be about creating a list of the clients or the people or the companies that you're going after. You need to be able to keep track of that. You're going to need to be able to reach out to them and try and schedule some kind of meeting or demo or whatever it is, drinks, lunch, show them what you're talking about. So again, all of that comes down to, there's got to be a certain amount of budget that allows you to, do those things. You have to be able to meet people and chase after them. Remember, every person that you're trying to sell to has a full-time job. They're trying to get their own job done. And as a salesperson, you're probably interrupting them. But you're interrupting them for a good reason. You're trying to make their job easier. So if you do have a solution, they will want to meet with you. If you don't, or if you can't communicate the problem solution, then they don't understand why you're phoning them or why you're trying to track them down.
Okay, so you mentioned ads come under marketing, prospecting is under sales. What else comes under the category of higher level category of sales?
Well, entertainment would be one thing. Like, literally people phone each other up and go, hey, can I take you out for drinks? I want to talk to you about the market and that we've got this thing. And people are like, yeah. I'm really busy at work, but I'm happy to sit back and have a beer and I'll be relaxed and be more open about, tell me about the problem that you're facing and what are you doing about it. So don't underestimate that, having an expense account for the salesperson. Travel, sometimes,
Conferences?
yeah, or just travel. Like sometimes you have a really big client that's in another prospect that's in another city, and you just, you can't get everything done by Zoom. And so sometimes they're sort of like, hey, I'm gonna be in town next week. Can we meet? I want to show you something. So travel can be expensive, but it can be worth it.
Okay. How about marketing? You said ads come under marketing. Creating content, right, comes under marketing.
Yep,
Would something like podcasting to socialize and broaden your network,
absolutely.
would that be under marketing as well? What else comes under marketing?
Anything that's communicating and positioning the brand, talking about what the solution is, what the benefits are for the user, that's all marketing. It keeps you focused on what the product is and what the product isn't. And that's important because sometimes people, especially developers, start adding a whole bunch of things or they come up with new ideas that can take you off in a different direction. And so marketing is about keeping you sort of on track. These are our customers. This is the problem we solve. This is the price that we solve it at. We're not going to create something else just because for fun.
Right. And then when going back to sales for a second, persuasion, right? How what role does that play? In other words, like I'll give you a very practical example. We are very hesitant. We are again group of engineers trying to sell the product. We know it adds value, but we have to communicate that value. And to communicate that value, you have to reach out to people. And then we started to do it, and it's not everybody in the team who's comfortable doing that, but I'm one of them who does it. And even to me, who's actually quite an extrovert, it's much easier for me to talk to people without expecting something in return. But when it comes to sales, there is an expectation, so it makes this whole lot more difficult. Just even given my personality. So Go
Sure.
on LinkedIn, we try to prospect. We're very careful about the language, about all the research that we've done. It takes plenty of time. We send a message out to Chris. Now, what should that process look like? And tell you what the process looks like for us right now. We expect to send a single message to Chris, and we have not known each other. We try to draft, LinkedIn allows like 300 characters, so you have to squish everything you want to say in those 300 characters. You have to be very good at doing that. So we do that, and a lot of times we do nothing more because we like anything more becomes like you're being persuasive. Till somebody told me, was a sales engineer based out of Boston. He's like, you know what? He's a full time salesperson. He says, Krish, you got to send seven, you have to reach out 7 times, which is what the average is before you can expect any sort of a response. Now, that's just what I've been told and what I've learned. I want to just get your thoughts on that because what's a good way, what's not so good a way.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard this before where we say, you have to reach out, X number of times before you'll get a response. And in some cases that's true, but it depends a lot on what you're reaching out about and to whom at what time. And your inbox is probably the same as mine. You look at the junk folder, it's full of people trying to sell all sorts of different things. And they've spent an enormous amount of time and effort writing clever headlines and offers and things like that. And I'm sure that each one of those has probably tried to reach out to me at least 7 times, if not 10 or 20. Um, well, that's a problem, right? A lot of the mechanics of that is just going straight to spam, or if it's popping up on LinkedIn, I might spend a half of a second looking at it and to go, what is this? Who is this person? What do they want from me? There have been cases actually, where people do reach out on LinkedIn and there's something there and you follow it up for sure. But remember, there is a signal to noise, and sales is a lot about being an extrovert and not being sort of a shy person who's going to attend an event and stand at the back and not say anything. You have to get around, you have to introduce yourself, and you have to get to the point really quickly. This is what we do. So have your elevator speech ready.
So very specifically, if you were doing this, right, Chris, how many emails would you send out? Would it be one? Would it be seven? Something in between?
Well, I personally, I don't approach it that way. I'm not trying to hit a frequency of 7 against any specific individual. On the end that I'm working on, we're more on the lighthouse side of things, where we're projecting a message about what we do, and if people are interested in that, then we we have a better response when we reach out, whether it's at an event or wherever. We're very focused on keeping that content straight as to what we do.
Which means you're saying it's inbound in your example, right?
It's a lot more inbound in that way, or sort of more relationship building approach.
Yeah, no, I was just kind of forcing you to wear this hypothetical sales hat. Like if you were doing that,
Yeah,
what would your approach actually be? Would it be like we
yeah.
send it?
I would be at events. I would be at events a lot of the time. If I was a salesperson, I would be knocking down the door as much as I could to get to as many different events, and have a really really good business card and a really good 30-second elevator chat.
Okay, and then let's say somebody goes to an event again, like you mentioned, if you're an engineer, you're typically standing at the back and you're quiet. You expect people to come to you. Doesn't happen all the time. Uh, this is a very simple question, and hopefully it doesn't come across as silly, but it's a very genuine question because I run a company, but my background is as an engineer, and a lot of people I know are in that space as well. You go to an event, like you go to a conference. What is it that you should be expecting to do, or what are you expected to do? Because that is very unclear. Because if you give me an engineering problem, I'd be like, yeah, sure, I know how to go about solving this because I have it kind of laid out in my mind even before I start solving the problem. But when it comes to sales and showing up at an event, as much as we do to the extent possible, we are very unsure about what it is that we should actually even be doing when we are at those events.
Sure, but the event is a filter. It attracts all the like-minded people to sort of, let's get together and discuss the subject. So it's not like a mismatch of like a football stadium full of people who have all different kinds of jobs and are all different you know things that they're doing. They're all at the event for a reason. So that means that you have absolute license to go around and talk about that sort of thing. And clearly it's hi, I'm so what do you do at whatever company you're at, and listen to what they have to say. That And again, you're trying to spend your time efficiently. So if it sounds like that they're off, they're not really interested in your product, move on, right? You're not going to convince anybody to change what they need.
And I also want to talk about quickly about the no's and the rejections, right? Because that's a key part of life and life in sales, for instance. And if you're not a salesperson, at least not your full-time job, it's something again you struggle with. So you go approach somebody, and you're very careful about who you're approaching, when you're approaching, and then they're like, "Nope, I'm not interested." There is this tendency, even for some of us, we've changed over the last many months of having been subjected to some of that, but it's easier said than done. How do you acknowledge that, saying, "Yep, Chris is not interested, let me move on to the next one," but not take any of this personally? How do you orient your mind to something like that?
Yeah, I mean, the way to think of that is they're just not interested at this time. And
Right.
it's that simple. Maybe the future will change and they'll say, oh, this is what I'm looking for. And I remember that guy that I met last month. Um, Suddenly they something has changed, and then they're seeking, they'll remember you if you have the right approach and you're respectful and all of that. You've made your impression. You've left them with some material. So it's never personal. It's a matter of fit. Some people will never be in a prospect, so, and other people, it's just a matter of time. You may be way ahead of the market. You've developed something so new that they're not ready yet. So it's going to take time, and maybe they like it, but their boss doesn't. And again, it's going to just take time.
And you mentioned the elevator, the pitch, right? The 30-second pitch, for instance. Is that, I've seen people dish out the standard 30 seconds to almost everybody. To me, it didn't make any sense, but I just want to get your thoughts on, should that be customized to the person you're talking to, or do I walk around using the exact same pitch to everybody, regardless of what their background and role happens to be?
Oh, I think it's pretty natural in a conversation for somebody to ask you a question. So Krish, what do you do? What do you do for a living? And you have to have a good answer. I develop blah 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 blah. And well, who do you do that for? We develop software. We develop this or that for these type of people. It's a high end product or it's a small product or whatever. I mean, you can make it very conversational so that people understand exactly what you're doing without it being salesy.
Right, but what I'm asking there, Chris, is you have 30 seconds and you don't know what Chris's background is. So do you first find out, sort of understand who they are before you draft your 30-second verbal pitch, or do you sort of have the exact same answer regardless of what Chris actually does for a living?
It depends. I mean, if you think they're really a prospect, then you might want to sort of tailor it a little bit depending on what you know at the time, right? Because they might not be quite ready. But in many cases, it's a simple question they ask, in the introduction of like, so what do you do? And you can seed that to say, this is the kind of company that we sell to usually, and hopefully they sort of go, oh yeah, that's me. Tell me more. Or you can talk about the problem, and if
Right.
they say, oh yeah, that's me. We solve this very specific problem where people are trying to do this and they can't get it done because of XYZ. This is what we do.
And as we get to the kind of the tail end of our conversation here, one of the last questions I had was, how much time do you allocate as a software team that's building software? Everything is important, nothing is less important. It just depends on what is more important at any given point of time. But given that marketing has to be like part and parcel of things that you do, right? It's almost like building a feature, but again, building a feature comes naturally to some of us than spending time in marketing. So, like in an average week, if you took a team of 5 people, what percentage of the collective time should be spent on marketing?
Well, it depends. I mean, if it's 5 developers, it should probably be zero, right? Because they should be busy developing.
No, what I
But
meant was, it's again, a lot of these startups don't have specific, you wear these multiple
for sure,
hats. So I'm just
yeah,
saying,
yeah,
five resources,
yeah.
what should they be spending on?
That's an impossible rule. It depends on the stage that they're at. I mean, if you have a minimum viable product, you should be out selling. If you don't have it, you should be coding. And if you're sort of a little bit sort of past the minimum viable, you're probably doing a bit of both, where you're looking at stage two and you're trying to sell, stage one at the same time. So you're going to be juggling chainsaws for a while.
Right. And as engineers, we try to try to find ways to quantify everything, and it's sometimes not possible, unfortunately, because that's the way you understand, right? Like binaries, you want to be able to quantify how
Yeah.
much of marketing. It sounds to me, I always thought that, but I could be wrong. Is it 100% art, or is there science to marketing as well?
Yeah, it's both, because you're going to get numbers. You're going to have a website. You're going to be looking at the amount of traffic. You're going to be looking at the people who are booking a demo, asking for more information. So all of that has some quantifiable numbers that are attached to it. You also have to think about, the cost of the staff. If you've allocated marketing staff, they're going to cost money. They're going to also have those salespeople with travel budgets. You have to ask yourself, is it worth, you can spend maybe $30,000 on sponsoring something. It better turn into some kind of leads. You've got some quantifiable numbers that are there, and that includes not only the cost and the amount of sales, but how long does it take those sales to close? You have a certain amount of runway there.
Cool.
So yeah,
Uh,
there's a fair amount of math involved.
and thanks for that. And I have one customary question I ask my guests, which is not related to the topic of
Okay.
conversation.
Yeah.
But before I did that, do you have any questions for me, Chris?
Oh, I mean, we've talked here for what looks like just
An
almost an
hour.
hour. So I think we've covered everything. But I'm curious what your question is.
Oh, yeah, sure. Okay. If you don't have any questions for me, but the thing I was going to ask you was, what is your comfort food? Like, if someone woke you up in the middle of the night, or the first thing that you generally like to eat?
What I generally like to eat, I like chocolate. It's milk chocolate's the best.
Oh, no, my question was more like a meal, like you're going for
Oh, a
dinner.
meal. Oh, I don't know if you can make a meal out of chocolate, but I'm pretty happy with things like steak and potatoes.
Sounds good. I think that's all we have. Unless you have any closing comments before we wrap this up, Chris.
No, thanks a lot, Krish. This has been really great chatting with you, and I hope that your journey at Snow Pal is doing well, and I wish you the best of success.
No, thank you. And again, folks, we had a chat with Chris Williams. Chris is a CMO at Arima Data, a startup that's focused on synthetic data and marketing mix modeling. So we'll include the link to your LinkedIn profile and to your company, Chris. But there's other links that you want for us to include when we publish the podcast. We're more than happy to do it. I'm just going to hit stop in a second, but if you could just stay for a couple of seconds because it just takes a little bit of time to complete the upload. But I'm going to say thanks for your time, and folks, until next time, thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Krish.